12 signs you're secretly poor, but look rich to everyone else. Have you ever looked around and wondered why so many people seem to be doing well financially, but you're struggling to make ends meet? You might have a decent job, drive a nice car, and live in a good neighborhood, but you're constantly stressed about money. What if I told you that you're not alone, and you might be part of what experts call the new poor? What if I told you that 65% of middle-class Americans are struggling financially despite earning above the poverty line? What if I told you that 40% of Americans can't plan beyond their next paycheck, and 46% don't have $500 saved for emergencies? This new form of poverty is invisible from the outside but devastating on the inside. These aren't people living on the streets. They're people with jobs, cars, and homes who look successful on the surface but are drowning financially underneath. Meet Sarah, a 34-year-old marketing coordinator making $55,000 annually. She drives a nice car, lives in a decent apartment, and always looks put together. But she has $1,200 in checking, $300 in savings, and $8,555 in credit card debt spread across 3 cards. Comment new poor if you've ever felt like you're working hard but getting nowhere financially. Let me show you the 12 signs that reveal whether you're trapped in this invisible financial prison. Sign 1. Living your entire financial life in installments. The first sign you might be part of the new poor is living your entire financial life in installments. If you're financing everything from your phone to your furniture to your vacation, that's a warning signal that you're spending money you don't actually have. Here's how this trap works. Instead of asking yourself, "Can I afford this?" you're asking, "Can I afford the monthly payment?" But here's the harsh truth that nobody wants to hear. If you can only afford something by paying it off over 12 months, you can't actually afford it. You're borrowing from your future self to pay for today's wants. Living in installments means mortgaging next month's financial flexibility for this month's purchases. Each installment payment becomes a chain that prevents you from building true financial freedom. When everything in your life has a monthly payment attached to it, you're not building wealth. You're building a collection of depreciating assets financed at high interest rates. The new poor have normalized installment living to the point where it doesn't even feel wrong anymore. They finance phones for $50 per month instead of buying them outright. They lease cars instead of buying reliable used vehicles. They put furniture, appliances, and even vacations on payment plans. Each individual payment seems manageable, $50 here, $80 there. But collectively, they consume most of their income. Sarah from our earlier example had 14 different monthly payment obligations. Her car payment, phone payment, furniture from that no interest for 12 months deal, her laptop on a payment plan, and even her mattress were being paid off monthly. When she finally added them all up, she was spending $1,850 every month just on installment payments. That's money that could have been building her emergency fund or investing for her future. Instead, it was going to banks and finance companies, keeping her trapped in the cycle of the new poor. Sign 2. Spending your entire month waiting for next payday. The second sign you're part of the new poor is spending your entire month waiting for the next payday. If you're constantly checking your bank balance and counting the days until your next paycheck arrives, you're living on the edge of financial disaster. This constant anticipation of payday means you're not living with money, you're living without it most of the time. You're in survival mode, carefully calculating whether you can afford a coffee or if you need to wait until Friday when you get paid. You're declining invitations because you're broke until payday. You're putting off small purchases because you don't have the cash right now. This creates chronic financial stress that affects everything in your life. It impacts your decision-making because you can't think clearly when you're always worried about money. It damages your relationships because financial stress bleeds into every conversation and interaction. It destroys your mental health because you're carrying this constant low-grade anxiety about whether you'll make it to the next paycheck. You can't make optimal financial choices when you're always in survival mode. Every decision becomes about getting through today rather than building for tomorrow. You end up making expensive short-term decisions because you don't have the luxury of thinking long-term. People who have escaped the new poor don't think about payday because they have enough money in their account to cover their expenses without timing everything around their paycheck. They've created a buffer, even if it's just one paycheck sitting in their account, that allows them to make decisions based on what's best long-term, not what's necessary to survive until Friday. The difference between living paycheck to paycheck and having a buffer is the difference between financial prison and financial breathing room. When you're waiting for payday, you're trapped. When you have a buffer, you're free. Sign 3, only talking about money when there's a problem. The third sign you're part of the new poor is only talking about money when there's a problem. The new poor treat money as a crisis management topic rather than a planning and growth topic. Money only becomes a subject of conversation when bills are due, when unexpected expenses pop up, or when there's serious financial stress. It's never discussed proactively. It's never planned for. It's only addressed when there's a fire to put out. People who build wealth talk about money before they need it. They have regular conversations about their finances. They plan, they strategize, they set goals, and they make proactive decisions about their money. They don't wait until there's an emergency to think about their financial situation. Money is a regular topic in their household, as normal as discussing dinner plans or weekend activities. If money only becomes a topic of conversation in your life when there's a shortage or a problem, you're operating in scarcity mode rather than abundance mode. This reactive approach to money management keeps you trapped in cycles of financial stress because you're always responding to crises instead of preventing them. Think about Sarah again. She and her partner only discussed money when a bill was overdue or when an unexpected expense hit. They never sat down to look at their overall financial picture. They never planned for upcoming expenses. They never discussed their financial goals or how to achieve them. Money was the topic they avoided until they absolutely couldn't anymore. This avoidance meant they were always surprised by regular expenses that should have been predictable. Christmas came every year, but they were never prepared for it financially. Car insurance was due twice a year, but they always scrambled to pay it. They were in perpetual reaction mode, which meant they never got ahead. They were too busy putting out today's fires to prevent tomorrow's. Sign 4, using shopping as emotional therapy. The fourth sign you're part of the new poor is using shopping as emotional therapy. The new poor often buy things to feel better emotionally rather than because they need or can afford those things. A bad day at work becomes a reason to buy new clothes. Relationship stress becomes a reason to order takeout instead of cooking at home. Boredom becomes a reason to browse online stores and add things to your cart. Feeling unappreciated becomes a reason to treat yourself with purchases you can't afford. This emotional spending creates a dangerous cycle that's incredibly hard to break. Financial stress leads to spending, which creates more financial stress, which leads to more emotional spending. The temporary emotional relief you get from making a purchase is quickly replaced by guilt and anxiety about money, which then creates more emotional stress that drives more spending. The purchases don't actually solve the underlying emotional problems. They just create new financial problems. You're trying to fill an emotional void with material things, and it never works. The happiness from a new purchase lasts maybe a few hours or days, but the debt from that purchase can last months or years. Sarah did this constantly. Had a frustrating meeting with her boss? She'd stop at Target on the way home and spend $60 on things she didn't need. Felt left out when her friends posted vacation photos? She'd order something online to make herself feel better. Every emotional low point became a spending trigger. People who have escaped the new poor understand that the things they really need, security, peace of mind, freedom, genuine happiness, can't be purchased at stores. They've learned to address emotional needs through non-financial means. They exercise, they talk to friends, they journal, they meditate. They've learned to separate their emotional state from their spending decisions. They recognize when they're vulnerable to emotional spending, and they have strategies to avoid it. Sign 5. Having no investment in financial education. The fifth sign you're part of the new poor is having no investment in financial education. The new poor constantly complain about money, but they don't invest time or resources in learning about money management, investing, or wealth building. They'll spend 3 hours researching the best deal on a new TV, comparing prices across different websites, reading reviews, and calculating which store offers the best value. But they won't spend 30 minutes learning about compound interest or how retirement accounts work. They'll pay $15 a month for Netflix, Spotify, and other entertainment subscriptions, but they won't buy a $20 book about personal finance. This willful financial ignorance keeps them trapped because they don't know what they don't know. They make expensive mistakes repeatedly because they have never learned better strategies. They miss opportunities for growth because they don't recognize them. They pay more in fees and interest than necessary because they don't understand how the financial system works. Meanwhile, people who build wealth understand that investing in financial education is the highest return investment they can make. They read books about money. They take courses on investing. They listen to podcasts about personal finance during their commutes. They continuously improve their financial knowledge because they understand that knowledge creates opportunities. Every book they read might contain one idea that saves or makes them thousands of dollars. Every course they take might teach them a strategy that changes their financial trajectory. Every podcast episode might introduce them to a concept that unlocks new possibilities. The wealthy don't know more about money because they're smarter. They know more because they invested time in learning. They made financial education a priority rather than an afterthought. They treated their financial knowledge like a skill that needed constant practice and improvement, just like any other important skill in their lives. And that investment in knowledge paid dividends for the rest of their lives. Sign 6. Being obsessed with what others think about your possessions. The sixth sign you're part of the new poor is being obsessed with what others think about your possessions. If your biggest concern is what people think about your car, your clothes, or your phone, you're spending money you don't have to impress people who don't matter. This obsession with appearances drives the new poor to make terrible financial decisions. They buy cars they can't afford because they're worried about what coworkers will think if they drive something older. They wear designer clothes, and they put on credit cards because they want to look successful. They upgrade their phones every year because they don't want to seem behind or poor. But here's the reality. People who are truly wealthy don't need to prove anything to anyone. They're more concerned with their net worth than their image. They're more focused on their financial security than their social status. They understand that real wealth is what you have, not what you show. The prosperity mindset doesn't live on outward appearances, but on inner security. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, still lives in the house he bought in 1958 and drives normal cars. He doesn't need to prove his wealth to anyone because he's actually wealthy. Displaying false wealth means spending money you don't have to be someone you're not. This keeps you trapped in the new poor because you're prioritizing appearances over actual financial progress. Every dollar you spend trying to impress others is a dollar you're not saving or investing for your actual future. Sarah felt constant pressure to keep up appearances. She needed to look successful at work, so she bought expensive work clothes. She needed her car to look nice, so she leased a newer model. She needed her apartment to look Instagram-worthy, so she bought furniture she couldn't afford. All of this spending was about what others would think, not about what she actually needed or could afford. Sign 7. Working hard, but having little to show for it financially. The 7th sign you're part of the new poor is working hard but having little to show for it financially. Many people in the new poor work long hours, have demanding jobs, and put in significant effort. But when their paycheck arrives, there's barely anything left after expenses. This happens because they're selling their time without a financial strategy. They're focused on earning money, but not on keeping money or growing money. They work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and at the end of the month, their bank account looks almost the same as it did at the beginning. All that effort, all that time away from their families, all that stress, and nothing to show for it. Hard work alone isn't enough. You need systems and strategies that make your money work as hard as you do. Without a clear financial plan, without intentional decisions about where your money goes, you can work yourself to exhaustion and still end up broke. Sarah worked hard. She was at her desk by 8 every morning. She stayed late when projects demanded it. She brought work home on weekends. She was a dedicated, hard-working employee. But despite all that effort, she had less than $1,500 in total savings and almost $9,000 in debt. Her hard work was paying her bills, but it wasn't building her wealth. People who escape the new poor understand that effort without strategy leads to exhaustion without progress. They focus not just on earning more, but on spending less, saving more, and investing wisely. They create systems that capture some of their income before it gets spent. They automate their savings. They have clear budgets. They make their money work for them through investments. They understand that working hard is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also need to work smart, with clear financial strategies that turn your effort into actual wealth building rather than just survival. Sign 8. Complete dependence on a single income source. The 8th sign you're part of the new poor is complete dependence on a single income source. When your entire financial security depends on one job, one client, or one income stream, you're vulnerable to economic changes completely beyond your control. This single point of failure puts you in an incredibly weak negotiating position. You can't take risks because you need this income to survive. You can't negotiate aggressively for better pay because you're afraid of losing what you have. You can't walk away from toxic work environments or bad situations because you need that paycheck coming in every 2 weeks. The new poor love people who have only one source of income because it makes them easy to control and predict. You'll accept poor treatment, low raises, and unfavorable conditions because you have no alternatives. You're trapped, and everyone knows it. When the pandemic hit, millions of Americans with single income sources discovered just how vulnerable they were. One job loss meant complete financial collapse. No backup plan, no alternative income, no safety net. Just an immediate crisis. People who build wealth understand that freedom comes from income diversification. They develop multiple income streams, maybe a job plus freelance work, or a job plus investment income, or a business plus rental income. They build passive income sources that generate money without requiring their direct time and effort. They create financial flexibility that allows them to make choices based on opportunity rather than desperation. Sarah's entire financial life depended on her $55,000 salary. If she lost that job, everything would collapse immediately. She had no side income, no investment income, no backup whatsoever. This made her afraid to ask for raises, afraid to set boundaries at work, and afraid to even look for better opportunities because the risk of any disruption felt too dangerous. Her single income source wasn't security. It was a single point of failure. Sign 9. Being afraid to talk about money openly. The 9th sign you're part of the new poor is being afraid to talk about money openly. The new poor avoid discussing finances because they're ashamed of their situation or afraid of judgment from others. When money comes up in conversation, they change the subject. When friends suggest expensive activities, they make excuses rather than admitting they can't afford it. When family asks how they're doing financially, they say fine even when they're drowning in debt. They pretend everything is okay when it's not, because the shame of their financial situation feels unbearable. This silence and shame keep them trapped in isolation. They think they're the only ones struggling, so they don't reach out for help or advice. They don't learn from others who faced similar challenges. They don't get the support and accountability they need to make changes. The shame creates isolation, and the isolation prevents improvement. Meanwhile, people who build wealth understand that talking about money is fundamental to learning, growing, and improving their financial situation. They're comfortable discussing investments, strategies, and goals because they see money as a tool rather than a source of shame. They ask questions, they share what they're learning, they're honest about their challenges and their successes. They know that financial improvement rarely happens in isolation. You need people to learn from, people to be accountable to, and people who can offer different perspectives and ideas. Keeping your financial struggles secret means staying stuck in those struggles. Sarah never talked about money with anyone. Her friends didn't know she had credit card debt. Her family didn't know she was stressed. Even her partner didn't know the full extent of their financial problems because they both avoided the conversation. This isolation meant she never got advice, never learned from others' experiences, and never felt the accountability that comes from sharing your situation with someone you trusted. Sign 10. Constantly comparing your life to others. The 10th sign you're part of the new poor is constantly comparing your life to others. The new poor are trapped in comparison cycles, where they're always looking at what others have, what others earn, or what others can afford. You scroll through social media and see friends buying houses, taking vacations, wearing designer clothes, and eating at expensive restaurants. Every post makes you feel like you're falling behind. Every comparison drives you to spend money you don't have to keep up with a lifestyle you can't afford. This comparison drives spending decisions and lifestyle choices that keep you financially trapped. You buy a car you can't afford because your coworker drives a nice one. You take a vacation you have to finance because everyone else is posting travel photos. You upgrade your phone because you don't want to seem like the person with the old model. But here's what you're not seeing: the credit card debt behind those vacation photos, the car payments eating up half that coworker's paycheck, or the financial stress hiding behind the perfect Instagram posts. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's highlight reel, and it's destroying your financial peace. Successful wealth builders focus on their own path, their own goals, and their own progress. They understand that comparison is the thief of joy and the enemy of financial progress. They measure success by their own standards, not by what others appear to have. They ask themselves, am I better off financially than I was last year? Not, am I doing better than my neighbor? They celebrate their own progress. I paid off a credit card this month. Not, I need to buy what everyone else has. Sarah compared herself to everyone. Her coworkers seemed to have nicer clothes, so she bought more. Her friends took trips, so she felt pressure to travel too. Her social media feed was full of people who seemed to be doing better, so she spent money trying to keep up. Every comparison pushed her further into debt. Sign 11. Thinking only about immediate needs and wants. The 11th sign you're part of the new poor is thinking only about immediate needs and wants. The new poor live in the present without considering future consequences. They make financial decisions based on what they want right now, rather than what's best for their long-term financial security. They see something they want, and they buy it without thinking about next month's bills. They spend their entire paycheck within days of receiving it because they're focused on immediate gratification. They don't save for emergencies because emergencies feel abstract and far away. They don't invest for retirement because retirement feels like someone else's problem. This short-term thinking prevents wealth building because building wealth requires delayed gratification. It requires saying no to what you want today so you can have what you need tomorrow. It requires sacrificing immediate wants for future security. It requires thinking in years and decades, not just days and weeks. Every financial decision becomes about right now. I want this now, so I'm buying it now. There's no consideration of whether buying this now means you can't pay your bills later. There's no thought about whether this purchase prevents you from building your emergency fund. There's no calculation of the opportunity cost, what you're giving up in the future to have this thing today. People who build wealth think differently. Before making a purchase, they ask, how does this decision affect my financial situation 3 months from now? 6 months? A year? They're willing to delay gratification because they understand that every dollar spent today is a dollar that can't work for them tomorrow. Sarah lived completely in the present. When she wanted new clothes, she bought them without thinking about next week's car payment. When she wanted dinner out, she went without considering whether she could afford groceries later. She made every financial decision based on what she wanted in that moment, never considering the future consequences. Sign 12. Believing that financial improvement is impossible. The 12th and final sign you're part of the new poor is believing that financial improvement is impossible. The new poor have given up on the idea that their situation can change. They've accepted financial struggle as permanent and stopped believing that wealth building is possible for people like them. They say things like, I'll never get ahead, the system is rigged against people like me, I'll be in debt forever, or rich people were just lucky. They've resigned themselves to financial mediocrity. They've stopped trying to improve because they don't believe improvement is possible. This resignation is the most dangerous sign of all because it prevents action. When you believe change is impossible, you stop trying to change. You stop looking for opportunities. You stop learning about money. You stop making efforts to improve. You've given up before you've even started. But the truth is that financial improvement is possible for anyone willing to recognize these patterns and make different choices. Thousands of people have escaped the new poor by changing their behaviors and mindsets. They didn't win the lottery. They didn't inherit money. They didn't get lucky. They made different choices consistently over time. The families who escape these patterns aren't necessarily the ones who earn more money. They're the ones who recognize these 12 signs, reject the social pressures that create them, and make deliberate choices to prioritize financial security over financial appearances. Sarah had almost given up. She told herself that she'd always have debt, that she'd never be able to save, that financial security was for other people but not for her. This belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you can't change, you won't even try. And if you don't try, you definitely won't change. But the moment Sarah recognized these patterns and believed change was possible, everything shifted. Belief doesn't guarantee success, but without belief, success is impossible. Here's your specific action plan to escape the new poor. First, conduct an honest assessment of which signs apply to your situation. Don't judge yourself, just observe and acknowledge the patterns. Second, pick one sign that resonates most strongly and commit to changing that behavior over the next 30 days. If you're living on installments, stop financing new purchases. If you're shopping emotionally, implement a 24-hour waiting period. Third, start investing in your financial education immediately. Read one personal finance book, listen to podcasts, or take an online course. Fourth, build a small emergency fund of $1,000 as quickly as possible. Fifth, find one person you can talk to honestly about money. The new poor thrives on isolation and shame. Break that cycle. Sixth, focus on increasing the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Seventh, reject the social pressure to maintain appearances that don't reflect your actual financial situation. Remember, The new poor are maintained by shame, isolation, and the belief that financial struggle is permanent. But 35% of middle-class Americans have escaped these patterns by making different choices. And you can too. Comment "new poor" and tell me how many of these 12 signs you recognized in yourself. Your journey out of the new poor starts with the next financial decision you make. Make it count.